All right, everybody. Sorry about that brief delay there. I was trying to get us set up on YouTube. I'm not sure exactly what is going on with the Rumble stream. Maybe it's something with my internet connection. I was convinced that that was fixed. But if you guys continue having trouble with the the definition of the picture, let me know, please. Um, Before we get started, let's just have a quick word from some of our Badlands partners and sponsors, and we will begin with the great Benson Honey Farms.
Welcome to Benson Honey Farms, where every jar is pure gold. Benson's Honey is excited to be back on Badlands Media with their honey harvest straight from their Nebraska farm, where they've been busy working to improve state politics from the ground up. They never forgot the importance of sharing the best honey around. And did you know that honey isn't just a sweet treat, it's nature's medicine, perfect for alleviating allergies, soothing upset stomachs, or as a delicious natural sweetener for baking? Benson honey is never heated, ensuring you receive it in its pure, raw form, full of natural goodness. At Benson Honey Farms, quality and purity is the top priority. They're committed to providing the finest honey from hive to home. So visit badlandsmedia.tv/honey. Use the promo code BADLANDS for 20% off your purchase. Benson Honey Farms, savor the authentic taste of Nebraska and support this America First business. You can follow them on Facebook at Benson Honey Farms and TikTok at Mo Benson Honey Please. Episode 1, they are the subject of episode 1 of John's America First Stories, which airs on Sundays. You can watch that on replay, kind of learn about the company and learn about what Mo has been through over the last few years. And she's now looking better than ever. But I have this in my household. Usually buy it by the pound. And, it's just coursing through my veins most of the time.
As it should, as it should.
Yeah.
We also have a word from Earth Echo Cacao. They are the sponsor of tonight's show. Try cacaobliss.com/badlands. This episode is brought to you by Cacao Bliss, a ceremonial grade cacao drink with 7 superfoods to keep your heart and arteries strong and healthy. What if the reason you feel like your body changed the rules on you isn't your fault? Harvard researchers found the one thing you can drink every morning to almost age in reverse. See, after 50, your body's internal repair crew drops off like flies. We're talking about stem cells. They maintain your arteries, regulate your metabolism, and support your energy. Diet and exercise help, but it doesn't bring that repair crew back. Here's what does. Harvard scientists found this tribe in Panama that drinks 5 cups of jungle chocolate every day. Their 80-year-olds have the hearts of our 40-year-olds, and their secret is raw cacao, which is rich in something called flavonols, which can more than double stem cell production and help you start feeling better than you have in 20 years. Cacao Bliss from Earth Echo has the highest grade raw cacao we've ever seen. Plus, it's only 35 calories, and it tastes like hot chocolate. Learn more and get your special discount and free shipping today at trycacaobliss.com/badlands. And cacao is CACAO, cacao. Also, it comes in a quite a beautiful package, and yes. I agree, it's very high quality stuff. What's that?
It's very satisfying. The package it comes in, which I know we've oversold that, but it's good. Yeah. It's good stuff, but it also comes with like a good container to keep it in. You don't have to keep it in plastic. They give you a thermos and all that kind of stuff. And it's good. I like adding it. I like it by itself, but I also like putting a little bit of it, like half that, half coffee. That's what I've been doing recently.
I still do full coffee, but also add that.
Yeah.
And I've never considered that you might want to do that half coffee.
If you're crazy.
But, yeah. Oh, hey, man. I just, I have a firm commitment to the coffee, and I can add to the scenario, but never take away. Okay. And with that, we can get started. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Badlands Story Hour. I'm Chris Paul. That is Burning Bright. And tonight we are discussing Wake Up Dead Man. Written and directed by Ryan Johnson, starring Daniel Craig. The first performance I've ever seen from Josh O'Connor, Glenn Close, Josh Brolin, Mila Kunis, Jeremy Renner, Kerry Washington, and Jeffrey Wright's in there, Thomas Hayden Church. An incredible cast, as Ryan Johnson always puts together for these films. And really a much So I like the Knives Out movies. I think they're very clever and very entertaining. I don't think that they're incredible, but they're a lot of fun. And they usually never required all that much thought, except in that part of your brain that likes to unravel the mystery
Yeah.
just a step before the film does. But this one's different. This actually hits on a much deeper level than the other ones do. And I love it. I'll leave it there and pass it off to you. This was a Burning Bright selection.
Yeah, some people might be confused that I chose the third Knives Out film for our first one. Maybe we'll eventually do the others. I've rewatching this. My curiosity is re-peaked to revisit film two. I said before the movie, I'm not sure if I said on the show last week. While I think Glass Onion, the second film in the trilogy, is well made and well acted, I did not like it. I think I totally understood what Johnson was trying to do with Glass Onion. I just didn't like it. And I often make my asides about whether or not I like a certain creator. In this one, I think it's very relevant to the discussion. As I said when I chose Wake Up Dead Man. I think Rian Johnson is supremely talented. I think he's a good writer. I think he's a great director. He tends to write his own films. He's one of those writer-directors, one of the few, I think, youngish writer-directors working in Hollywood that's kind of built something of his own style. You and I did on Story Hour a couple years ago, Looper. I think that was at least his first kind of major Hollywood release. And really good movie, great time travel movie. Kind of gave us some previews of Rian Johnson and what he's all about. For me, as a mix of a genre fan and as a info war person these days, I think Johnson will go down in history, unfortunately for him, as the director of The Last Jedi. And I don't just say that as a Star Wars guy. Like, I'm not even a huge Star Wars guy, I'm a genre guy. People who are not even Star Wars people have kind of like tangentially heard that Star Wars fans were upset about that movie. But where Johnson really affected his long-term standing in American culture is how he behaved with regards to feedback about that movie. Really soured me on him. As a person, as a creative, he essentially deconstructed Star Wars. I would say that what Johnson is as an artist is a deconstructive artist. He's a postmodern kind of writer. And that can be good. You know, I've criticized it, but we've done some movies on Story Hour in particular where it's great to deconstruct things. It's very illuminating. The reason people got so upset about what he did with The Last Jedi is he, in my view, and kind of by his own admission, deconstructed kind of a modern American myth, fictional myth, in a very hateful and cynical way. He very intentionally took a symbol of hope. Luke literally means hope in the Bible. That's what the name Luke means. It means light bringer. He took that character and he intentionally inverted him for American audiences to the point where he basically destroyed the most successful original IP in American history, pretty much single-handedly. And he was happy about it. And when asked about it in interviews, he fully confirmed that he did it intentionally. He wanted to subvert the myth. He wanted to rug pull all of the dads and sons that went to go see it because they were excited to see Star Wars. I say that to say, I think my politics and ideology is probably as far from Rian Johnson as anybody I could possibly think of. And so when I saw that, and not liking Knives Out 2, when I saw that he was doing a third one and the window dressing of it was the church, I thought, fuck you. There's no fucking way I am watching a Rian Johnson movie about faith. You can package that shit up and send it wherever you send everything else in modernity. And as it would happen, my in-laws were down my house in January, and they had watched one of the Knives Out movies on Netflix, and they were like, "Oh, look, it's the new Knives Out movie. Let's watch it." And I just went, "All right, okay." Press play. Mrs. Bright fell asleep. Everybody fell asleep, and I was hooked on this movie.
Yeah.
Not just because it's well made and it's well acted and it's well written. All my problems with Rian Johnson aside, all of his movies are well made, well directed, and well written. But it was that I was looking for the subversion in every scene of the movie. And now, having seen it 3 times, I do not think this is a subversive movie. I think it is really well done. It's earnest. I think it's fair. I think it takes some actually well taken shots at conservatism. I think it takes some good shots at Christianity in terms of the culture of it. I think it takes good shots at the church, and I think it takes a lot of good shots at liberalism. And, you know, for me, just my last opening thought would be, it felt to me like maybe Rian Johnson actually did learn some stuff from sort of the fallout of everything he dealt with on the back of his entry into the culture war. And I'm not saying he inverted all of his worldviews, but this to me feels like his most mature movie. And it felt like there are characters in this movie that seem like they are Rian Johnson from 2016 that he is making fun of. Mm-hmm. While he's also making fun of Con Inc., MAGA, and, you know, super churches and all the rest of it. So I think there's a lot to it, but I guess the baseline is, I think the discussion, the good faith, no pun intended, arguments and discussion in the movie about faith are really well handled. And I can't think of a modern movie, like a big budget modern movie, that has these kind of discussions in the way that this movie does. So I think it's well worth a watch, and it's also really entertaining.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you say, you know, it's different than how he would have been in 2016, and maybe he's learned some things. It's called Wake Up Dead Man. He could be talking about himself. You know, it's entirely possible that he had some realization and wanted to try to capture that. I watched Yorgos Lanthimos' film Begonia over the weekend and was texting you guys about that. Begonia is the Jesse Plemons and this other actor I've never seen before, who plays his kind of not all mentally there cousin, and the two of them kidnap Emma Stone, who is a Time Magazine Woman of the Year medical biomedical executive, and they accuse her of being an Andromedan. She's an alien. And so they kidnap her and they basically torture her in a basement so that she will introduce them to her leader so that they can make a deal between the Andromedans and the Earth people. And so these two guys are presented as these kind of lunatic conspiracy theorists in some sense. They're kind of just the losers of society and the rest of it. And there's an element of that seems, as someone who critiques the mainstream story of things and kind of mainstream belief, it's certainly an attack on that viewpoint on some level, but it's not only that. It's a complex understanding of the facets of different belief systems. And, you know, there are people who are into conspiracies and anti-government and anti-elitism and all these things that would make you question the central narrative. There are plenty of, there's so many viewpoints in there. Some of them are absolutely nuts and some of them are totally rational. And I'm not saying that I'm the judge of that, but it's good to understand that it's not just one thing. It's not a monolithic, opposition to the central narrative is not a monolithic thing. Opposition to government is not a monolithic thing. And it was actually a really good study of some of those viewpoints. And between that and the film that we did, man, the one where God, I can't think of his name, Sam Rockwell drops into futuristic Los Angeles, and the whole
Oh,
thing is like in a
good luck, have
simulation.
fun, don't die. Yeah,
Perfect. Yes, and everything, everywhere, all the time. I hope I'm getting
yeah,
that right. There's a
all at
number of these
once.
movies that have come out in the last few years
Hmm.
that have really gotten into pretty good depth with a lot of the contours of this kind of, you call it awakening, but whatever it is that we're experiencing right now. And I had a moment where I took a step back and was like, Hollywood is reckoning with this a lot better than we give it credit for. And it's kind of sad that we don't give it more space to do that. And then, just to the Star Wars thing. Now, I don't watch these Star Wars movies, so I have no idea whether The Last Jedi is good or terrible or anything. I do know that a lot of the people who said it was really terrible also said The Odyssey was terrible. And I
Yeah.
saw that over the weekend. That's one of the greatest movie experiences I've ever had in my life. Like, that movie is not terrible. That movie is great. And the craziest thing is, it's great in an entirely pro Christian and pro Christ as logos sort of way. And man, Christopher Nolan's there, Ryan Johnson's there. There's a bunch of good filmmakers having really serious discussions about some really important things that don't hesitate to critique the systematic approach to what faith is and what our purpose is and the rest of it. They're still critiquing that thing that we critique, but they're doing it from the right viewpoint and getting no credit for it. And I think that we are potentially selling short some of the greatest artists in maybe the most important artistic medium of our lifetimes, based on the pre-reviews, if that makes sense, of people that we don't trust about anything else. And we're taking their viewpoints and allowing our interpretations of these parts of the world to be colored by what the worst people think about these things.
Yeah, and I think it's good to marinate on this a little bit before we even get into the meat of this particular movie, because I think that's well taken. And again, I said the Last Jedi anecdote as that's how I felt in 2017. That's when that movie came out, and this was the beginning of the Trump era. And now, granted, my argument, like, I'm probably going to write a book about this at some point in terms of the culture war aspect of things, and then the culture war against the culture war, and then the inversion of the culture war, and all that kind of stuff. Because I was a creative, like, I was a genre fiction guy. That's what I was doing at that time, in addition to working in combat sports, which I've done my entire adult life. I was making more money in genre fiction from 2016 to 2019 than I was in combat sports. That was my sort of industry. And I wasn't watching YouTube channels about the culture war. Ryan Johnson's The Last Jedi, in my opinion, created the culture war. There are literally channels, and you can look at the YouTube histories. You go to these big channels. Ask Rock, what are the biggest culture war channels on YouTube? And it'll tell you, Gary from Nerdrotic, Geeks and Gamers, The Critical Drinker. And you sort by oldest, and you look at 10 people watching their videos, 1,000 people watching their videos, a fucking million people watching their videos. 2017, The Last Jedi. It was that movie weaponized the culture war. That movie provoked the culture war. And it was just one of a whole thing. Now, the reason I say that is, I think what you're saying is true. But I think, and we had a discussion on a different topic adjacent to this earlier today. I think the Con Inc. culture war industry co-opted what was at the time earnest pushback against cultural subversion. That's how I see it. Myself and like my brother and three of my cousins went to go see that movie. We didn't even use the term culture war in 2017. And we came out of that going, I pissed. Just being like, felt like we had been waterboarded by somebody who was, there is a scene in The Last Jedi where a purple-haired woman lectures the only white guy in the scene about his privilege in a Star Wars movie because he tried to give her orders and he's the commander of the ship. Like, and Rian Johnson did that very knowingly and very intentionally, in my view. So I think both things are true. I think that Hollywood went full bore into the culture war. I think they were provoked into it. I think, and I've learned some of this from you and some of this through a decade of observation and hindsight. I think that many people in Hollywood, it's funny because as creatives, I think to your point, we probably don't give them enough credit. I think as intellectuals, we give them way too much credit. And we're giving them too much credit at the time. What I mean by that isn't even to shit on them. What I mean is a lot of people in our audience, including myself, 10 years ago, were convinced that all these people were running psyops on us and trying to subvert our culture, and they were trying to destroy Americana and all this kind of stuff. And I don't think that's what was going on in hindsight. But I do think they were living in a bubble. And I do think many of these brilliant creators and artists were psyoped into thinking there is an existential threat to leftism, to liberalism, to freedom and creative expression and all this kind of stuff in the American zeitgeist in the emergent era of Donald Trump. And they very willingly tried to combat that. Just like I think the controlled opposition dynamic on the Con Inc. right has weaponized a whole segment of MAGA or of conservatism into, if you see anything leftward, anything creative, anything Hollywood, attack, 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 right? Like attack it like it's an infection. My view is that Hollywood was doing that in the emergent Trump era about anything white, anything masculine, anything MAGA coded, anything nationalist, anything Christian in that era. So what I'm seeing now, what I would agree with is that I think some of these Hollywood types that maybe did kind of participate or accidentally or on purpose in the culture war 10 years ago are reflecting on that and thinking, I think we got a little crazy back there. I think things got a little crazy. Maybe 50% of the country wasn't Nazis because, again, while some people separate art and an artist entirely, I don't. I will still watch an artist's work that I don't like as a person, but I don't separate when the artist himself is making comments about half the country being Nazis. I'm like, this is probably in his art somewhere. And same thing the other side. But I think at this point, the rage culture and something that's actually in the meat of this movie with some of the ancillary characters, well, not even ancillary characters, Josh Brolin's character, the character of Psy, it feels like Johnson at this point is very accurately pointing out, the weaponization of nationalism and all these right-wing ideologies that Con Inc. has done. He does a good job of that in this movie. And I think in 2017, he was like, this is all that's going on over there. Just like a lot of people on the right do that to this day. We see it in our own audience. We see it in the culture war where it's like, if it comes out of Hollywood, it must be a subversive attack on what it means to be an American, which is just not the case.
Yeah. And I guess that what's up for debate is why that's not the case, because I am totally open to the idea that they are intending to subvert culture out of Hollywood and that the people running Hollywood do intend to subvert culture. That said, I also have a number of creative people in Hollywood who are longtime friends of mine who say that the way to conquer that is by subverting that themselves through their creative process and by being really clever with how they communicate ideas. The fact that they can package certain things into a package that the system will accept. And Christopher Nolan may well have been doing that with some of the choices from Odyssey, like the whole Ellen Page thing, the Elliot Page thing. People got really, really upset about that. And I don't think that I'm spoiling this for anyone at this point, but he is on screen for 2 or 3 whole minutes out of a 3-hour long movie and gets killed immediately. It's
as a decoy.
like,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's not playing Achilles, it's
Yeah.
the whole, that whole thing was just so wrong and so dumb. And it's making people miss out on something that is at its like very core, the most important message. The movie is predominantly anti-pagan, which is one of the most interesting conversations right now, because you have a religion that is, or a belief system or a spiritual practice or whatever you want to call the following of Christ. It's about never prioritizing the world over the spiritual realm, the godly. You never prioritize the needs of the world, the material realm, over that which is godly. And the pagan thing and all other religions are the reverse. God is a conduit for success in the world, and you please and worship God so that you can get things back in the world. And those are entirely different ways to approach the world. And it shows that the Odyssey was about someone who succumbed to the world, realized that eventually, and was so ashamed of it that they could never travel home. And so eventually, obviously, and I know that this is Homer in this telling the story, but how many times and how many different ways has the Odyssey been told over the millennia? And to then single out this one that Christianizes it and try to create mass cultural hate against it before it is seen was actually crazy to me. That whole experience blew my mind. But we can, respond if you want, but otherwise we can get.
Well, I'll use this to transition into the actual meat of this movie, because you and I have talked for years on these shows about we kind of, from a political lens, had kind of come into this stuff from disillusionment with the left, the so-called left, the cultural left and political left, and spent most of our lives kind of in that paradigm, which is a diverse paradigm. No pun intended. No, I don't mean it was black. It's a diverse paradigm with multiple viewpoints, just like the right-wing paradigm is. But we kind of were in that general macro. And one thing that I think is that I still believe. I saw a comment, and I mean this earnestly. I don't mean to criticize the comment. I saw somebody in the chat a few minutes ago say, if only Angel Studios, for example, had all this cash, Hollywood cash. I don't know the people behind Angel Studios. For anybody who doesn't know, they're an independent studio that I think they did that Jim Caviezel trafficking movie. They've done a few. They've done a few over the last few years that have made a bunch of money relative to their budgets. Overtly Christian theming, sort
Mormon
of
production.
Yeah.
Angel Studios, yeah.
Yeah, so and that's actually exactly where I was going to go with that. So I would suggest that many of the MAGA types, including in our audience, who think that Hollywood is this subversive liberal machine, I would suggest that if you are running open arms into Angel Studios without maybe Googling who made it and where that money is coming from, are running headfirst into something that knows, unfortunately and frankly, that if you throw some Jesus into a movie trailer, a lot of you are going to rush headlong into that theater to shovel your money toward what? A Hollywood studio, which is exactly what Angel Studios is. And it's one that has figured out that actually the barrier to entry to getting the money from conservative Christian America when it comes to creation, to creative endeavors such as movies, is to just plug into an AI, what do Christians like? Make very poorly filmed, poorly acted, poorly produced movies with those themes, release 1 or 2 of those every year, and make 10 times your budget. That's what they're doing. So you can support those movies if you want to support them. I'm not saying they're all bad. I'm not saying that they're good. I'm just saying that that's a business model. And they have commoditized faith as an industry. which isn't to say that everybody working on the movies has those beliefs, right, or that intention, but that's what the studio is doing. And I would also say that the other point I'd make, which this is controversial to some people, it is my opinion still, one of the things that I've retained from my former leftist mindset, is that left-wing quote-unquote people, I'm not talking about like crazies, just like you mentioned earlier with conspiracy theorists. There are some crazies in conspiracy world that are talking about the Pleiades and all that kind of shit, right? Just like there are crazy leftists that are blue-haired land whales that are marching for BLM and all that kind of stuff, right? That's not most lefties, though. Contrary to what Con Inc. and the Daily Wire wants to convince you of. And one of the things that I believe is that many of the so-called lefties in American society that fall for psyops against the country and against Christianity, against conservatism, fall for it actually because they are inherently more empathetic people than conservatives are. This is very observable if you've known a lot of left-wing people and then you know a lot of right-wing people. It's not to cast aspersions on any side, but I believe a lot of leftist people tend to be very empathetic, very sympathetic, and very creative people. That's why they make better movies, guys. So the conspiracy theory that I would dispel is that right-wing movies, quote unquote, or studios are just being drowned out of Hollywood. They don't make good movies. Left-wing people make better movies. They make better stories. They're better writers. They're better creatives. Now, many of them do use that to subvert American society and Christian society, etc. And I would fully agree with that. But I would say the reason you're not seeing a lot of right-wing creation is because a lot of right-wing people are not creative. And I think we need to kind of get back to that. And to transition to this movie, I think we see a little bit of this dialectic in the very opening scene, where you've got Father Judd, who's going to be dispatched on this mission. And he is, in the back and forth with the two other priests there. And one of them, I forget the exact wording, you had it clipped out at the beginning of the show, but says, the world is full of wolves, something like this. And basically it's all about offense. Like we got to go on offense. This is what we got to do. The church is falling behind. The church is being subverted. We need to attack the wolves. And Father Judd says, Christ came to heal the world, not fight it. And I fundamentally do not believe that that's what we need to do. And I don't believe that that's the Christian way, which is why the other priest there, what was his name? Played by Jeffrey Wright, Langstrom, he knows in that moment that Judd is the right guy to handle Father Wicks in this scenario, because he's not going to go there with a combative, offensive mindset. He's going to go there with a peacemaking mindset, which is not to say that he's weak. And that's where the movie first caught my attention, just there in that opening scene. It's like, okay, like you're laying out a thesis here of what the movie's going to be about. And I think he follows through on that the whole way through. I think the character arc of Father Judd is just great in this whole movie. Again, I've seen it now 3 times. I've looked for subversion. And you mentioned this is your first time seeing Josh O'Connor. I've actually seen him in one other movie, which a lot of conservatives wouldn't watch because it's gay, literally, or at least it's bisexual. But the movie Challengers came out either last year or the year before. He's a tennis player in that movie. Totally different character. I would highly recommend it if you can get over some bisexual stuff going on in the movie. He's fantastic in that. But he's a totally different character than this. And yeah, like amidst a star-studded cast, I think Josh O'Connor is just like such an anchor in the movie. And that's what the character is in the context of the movie. So I thought it was an indictment on the controlled opposition dynamic. Like that is how I read the opening scene of the movie. And I think that's largely what kind of plays out throughout the rest of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think that gets right to the core of the key understanding of all of this is what is prioritized. and he straight up is making the case that you cannot put aside what you are commanded by God to do because someone convinces you that the world needs to be changed in a certain way. That is a lower order concern that cannot be subordinated to the higher, or that must be subordinated to the higher order concern. And they reapproach the same subject matter in the scene there in the middle when the storm is happening, and he's arguing with Benoit Blanc out in the storm and then in the church. And Blanc is like, "What do you mean? We've got a murder to solve." Mm-hmm. And he's like, "Yeah, that's your business. My business is not going around solving murders. That's not my purpose. In fact, that's not what anybody's purpose is. We all have the same purpose, which is to act in a godly manner and bring ourselves into alignment with that. It is not our business to go out and make sure other people in the world will align with that. And then once we have changed the world in God's image, then we can work on changing ourselves in God's image." And I just thematically, I think that that's one of the most important understandings of our time, and one that we were systematically conditioned out of throughout our lives by our culture. And let's pause there, and then we can come back to the film. We have to get to a couple more things, the first of which is the latest in an incredible line of soft disclosure commercials. Soft disclosure.
Soft Disclosure deodorant is made with purity-tested ingredients like organic arrowroot powder, magnesium hydroxide, and nourishing plant oils. This deodorant keeps you fresh without covering up the truth. Activated charcoal works like a magnet to help draw out impurities, while green matcha tea brings antioxidant power to protect and calm skin. Aluminum-free, stain-free, and formulated to last up to 2 months of daily use.
Whole bus fresh, no steak on me. Soft Disclosure got me clean. Fresh so loud, can't compete. Mint, lemon, grapefruit, lavender tea.
It helps fight odor without blocking the body's natural sweat. And every purchase helps support 6 American small businesses. Buy 2 deodorants, get a free lip balm. Or visit softdisclosure.com and use promo code FRESH for 15% off.
What are you doing?
Soft Disclosure got me clean. Fresh so loud, can't compete.
It's amazing.
It's incredible. Yeah.
Yep.
What a time we live in. And by the way, in addition to the commercials being great, soft disclosure is actually just really good stuff.
It is good stuff.
Yeah, I had a dry spot on my hand, and the tallow bar fixed me up just right. So that's all I need to know. I don't have
My son is at a stage where
beard oil
he's just,
thing. It's pointless for me.
my son's at a stage where he's just handing things to me, and he like loves my reaction anytime he hands inanimate objects to me. And he got to the basket of soft disclosure stuff in the bedroom today. He was handing me each successive product, such as aloe and whatever.
At least he was just handing it to you and not trying to eat it.
Not yet. Yeah, but he is learning, unlocking new skills like an RPG character every day. Today he learned how to climb things. And
Oh, good.
That's very dangerous. Yep.
Yes. Guys, we also have GART 13 coming up next month, September 17th to September 19th, a Thursday through a Saturday. We're going back to Las Vegas. We will be at the Ahern, September 17th to September 19th. Early bird pricing for virtual tickets is available right now. Save $10 on those through August 15th. Go to badlandsmedia.tv/events. You can also get your in-person tickets there as well. GART 13 in Las Vegas, Nevada, a mere 6 weeks from now. 6 weeks from this very evening, we will be in Lost Wages. That's what they call it in LA. I don't know if you call it that in the rest of the country. I suppose they probably do. Okay, so let's get back into wake up, dead man, and I will just toss it right back to you so you can get the kind of second part of our conversation going.
Yeah. So we mentioned Josh O'Connor. We'll come back to him and Father Judd. But the other principal character in this, fantastic performer, almost never disappoints, is Josh Brolin as Wicks. And he is the villain of the movie. And I think he earns that. I think in the second half, especially, once the revelation of what he is doing and what he is attempting, him and Sai, his biological son, are definitely sort of the villain cipher in the movie. But another thing I really liked about this movie, and that I'll give Johnson credit for, that I was leery of heading into it, is the trailers and even the opening couple of scenes with Wicks are very MAGA coded. And by MAGA coded, I mean they are coded in a way that it feels like you are watching Father Wicks through the lens of a Hollywood liberal. You are watching, that's how I took it. Like, this is what a Hollywood liberal thinks a church is. And it's Father Wicks kind of like giving his sermon and being really angry, and they make sure to like let you know that when he sees a mother out of wedlock, he's going to hammer her, and when he sees a couple of those dastardly gays, he's going to go right at them and make sure they get out of the church. And that happens in some churches, for sure. If it was just that, I'd be like, you motherfucker, Ryan. We know you're gay. Just get over it.
Is he?
But that's not what he's doing with that character. I don't know. I'm projecting. I'm projecting his assumed projection. But that's not what Johnson is doing. In fact, I think he's baiting a lot of traps in this movie for the people that you're talking about who were successfully baited by the Odyssey. I think he is presenting Wicks in the first few scenes and saying, like, I bet you think this is what liberals think of Christianity. And I think there's probably a lot of liberals watching this that are like, yeah, those Christians, they're crazy. And I think he's trapping both. It's again, I think this movie is a trap on the controlled opposition dynamic. It's a trap on binaries. Because while Wicks is that, he is this combative sort of bigoted warrior priest type of guy. He also, when he's given some room to breathe in some of his private dialogues, specifically the confessions and the conversations with Father Judd, he has some first principles, difficult to argue stances. You know, there's a scene you put in the clips package that's hilarious with Sai, where he's basically a modern Con Inc. Daily Wire influencer politician. And he's talking about how he tried everything. He tried the Jew thing. He tried the trans thing. Mm-hmm. He tried the gay thing. He tried the black thing. He tried the whatever thing. And like none of it worked.
Induction stoves cracks me up.
Yeah. So that's Sai, and he is surface level Con Inc. That's what he is in the movie. He's nothing more, nothing less. That's not what Wicks is, though. Wicks believes in something. And I think that's why Johnson was fair to that character. And what I mean by that is specifically in the scene that you put into the clips package where Wicks hits Father Judd and basically gives him like, here's my philosophy, you little bitch. Because you, Father Judd, think you know what I'm about, but you don't. And what I love about that scene is that's the dialectic. That is their ideological collision, physical, in that scene. And I think you can come out of that scene getting both points of view, where how many of us, like I'll speak for myself, and I think a lot of people in this audience in particular, that watch that specific scene in a vacuum are like, you're damn right, Father Wicks is right on. Because his whole appeal to Judd in that scene is, we have gotten into this position. You can be saying Americans, Christians, white people, humans. You could be saying this decade, the last century. You could be saying since creation. We are in this position because we have not been fighting. We are in this position because we have turned the other cheek, and because we have let them start by doing some gay stuff, and then do a little trans stuff, and then do a little of this and a little of that. And I am still highly sympathetic to what Wix is saying in that situation. In a vacuum, he's saying, if men like you do nothing, what's the age-old saying? The true evil is when good men stand by and do nothing. So at what point are you doing nothing from an ideological perspective in an ideological war? If you are not standing in your faith or putting 10 toes down, as they say, and saying, you're a fucking woman, Elliot Page. You're a chick. And as much as you can be falling into a controlled opposition dynamic, what are we supposed to do? As a society, we're supposed to just say, it's a guy now. It's a guy. In fact, to say it's not a guy is to insult this person. And I'm not even somebody who gives a shit really about insulting Elliot Page. What I'm saying is, I believe teaching my son that that's a woman is a lie. Because that's a lie. And that's what Wix is saying there. But to finish the point, I think ultimately what Judd proves is his approach on a long enough timeline is the more effective approach. Like Wix's reaction, I think, is honest and understandable. But I think Judd's approach is not, you are wrong for having this reaction or feeling this way. I think Judd's approach is, how is that working out for you? How is fighting everything working out for you? How is attacking? How is it growing the flock, as he says many times in the movie? It's not. And I think, you talk about the controlled opposition dynamic more than anybody, and the proof is in the pudding. There's a difference between pointing out verifiable truths about the nature of humanity and about reality and about good and evil, which I believe in, and then monetizing outrage against people or behaviors that, because of your business model, you need to keep going in order to keep the outrage going. And I think Judd ultimately proves that that is what Wick has become. Whether he was that the whole time or not, I think is kind of left open to interpretation. But ultimately, I think he does succumb to that and becomes he's a trauma farmer, he's a rage baiter. That is what he does, that's what he becomes. But I just think it presents it at least fair enough where Johnson is saying, like, does anything Wick says in that one little scene, is any of that wrong? And I would say, no, it's not wrong. And that's what I think makes their ideological clash more compelling.
Yeah, I mean, I guess by the fact-based claims, if you want to be angry at that stuff, then he's not wrong there. I think he's certainly wrong in the interpretation of what his role is in response. I would go back to, you said Wix is the villain here. And on some level, that's obviously true. I mean, he's probably the primary antagonist embodied in a character. But the villain ultimately, and the real antagonist, is the lust for worldly power and control. And that is Wix, that's in Martha, that's in Cy, certainly. And I guess that's in Dr. Nat. And I think that's probably it. And so you have a collection of these worldly people who are directionally moving toward evil. Then you have a collection of worldly people who are directionally moving toward good. And then you have people who are actually operating on a faith basis in proper alignment with divine order. So that's the first part. The idea that you can defeat evil in the world by fighting against the elements of the world is like putting the cart before the horse, really. Are you going to defeat those evil people? Well, there's a greater justification, I suppose, if someone is doing violence to you or to someone you love. Obviously, you want to stop that, and whatever happens in the consequence of stopping that is its own thing. But if someone inhabits the evil of living a homosexual lifestyle or attempting to make other people say different things about their gender identity that those people don't believe, well, sure, we can classify that under the category of evil, but what should our response be in that situation? Like, could those people be actually healed by modeling a life that would bring them to Jesus? The answer to that is yes. Will they be healed by conservatives getting on podcasts and yelling about it? The answer to that is obviously no. And I would say that the Daily Weimar has accomplished virtually nothing in the last 10 years of doing that other than increase the anger toward people that don't generally pose any threat. And that's no support for their lifestyle whatsoever. And of course, it's no support, obviously, for the drag queen story hour and the rest of that. But even that, you stop by just putting your foot down, not involving yourself in that at all, and then not giving it all the attention for 10 straight years while ignoring everything else that's going on. The fact that you can't actually solve that problem through elections, you can't actually solve that problem by attacking liberals on podcasts or listening to podcasts or yelling about it online. Like, that's just not where the solutions are. So if anger is the only thing that we embody, and that's the only drive toward that motivates our behavior, well, we're already screwed at that point. And I think that that's why, as you recognize, over the long term, that's not getting us to the place where that we need to go. And if everyone was doing what Father Judd is modeling, those other problems would disappear.
Yeah, well, and again, I use the Elliot Page example just because it's relevant to tonight, but spread that out, make that writ large across American culture, Western culture right now. If people, Christians, conservatives, whatever, think that constitutes anything ranging from degeneracy to inversion, right? Like that's how I think of it. I think of it as inversion. I mean, and it is hard to ignore with that stuff. Like, this is Satanism talks about this. It talks about gender, rendering the gender binary, inverting the gender binary. Like, this is one of the, it's maybe the hallmark of Satanism, making, and it's not just that, it's getting everybody to go along with this or to defend it as normal, getting to defend the obscene and the inverted as normal. But to your point, let's say you do believe that. Let's say as a Christian, that is how you feel when you look at a famous transgender person and you're like, not only is this person living an inverted, ungodly life, they are living a satanic inversion, and now they are being put into Hollywood movies about Greek epics and like put in my face and dressed up in armor and all this kind of stuff. So, like, again, the Daily Weimar outrage farms that whole thing. But myself and Zach a few weeks ago said, like, yeah, I'm going to wait until I hear people that I trust talk about it, because I have been burned before by being like, I think I'm going to go and watch a cool Greek myth, and I'm watching some sort of Western humiliation ritual. So when it's advertised that way, I'm certainly somebody who doesn't feel bad about not just giving my money over before I hear from people that I trust. And I trust you a hell of a lot more than I trust Christopher Nolan. Like, that's just the way it is. So, it's, they choose how they promote these things. They choose how they are trying to get people to pay attention to these stories. But to the Father Judd point of view, if you actually do feel that way about transgenderism and inversion and degeneracy, you should see those people as victims of this ideology, which is how I see them. And they would be pissed about that, right? Most of them would be pissed about you saying that, because they'd find it incredibly insulting and demeaning and everything. And that, I think that is more the approach. It doesn't mean you're all of a sudden going to bring like transgender people to Jesus, but if you actually did care from a godly point of view, and you actually did think like, hey, you might be living an inverted sort of existence that's really just an outward manifestation of all the pain that's going on in your psyche and repressed trauma. And, you know, I know a guy who might be able to help with that. His name's Jesus. Like, they're probably not going to respond well to that. But that represents an earnest outreach that at some point, just like an alcoholic, and we are seeing this if you believe data, if you believe any data, there is a trend of reversal and inversion of the inversion going on in that world, where people that kind of, through whatever psychological trauma they had, they kind of bought into that psyop, they maybe did something to themselves, they lived a different kind of life, and they're having come to Jesus moments and saying, man, I can't believe I did this to myself. I can't believe I was psyop this way. I can't believe I was this weak, whatever. But if you as a movement, and I mean a Christian movement, a conservative movement, a nationalist movement, whatever you're trying to be, if the only posture you've ever shown these people is aggression and anger and hatred, they're justifiably going to recoil from you and probably retreat further into what you consider a sort of satanic or degenerate lifestyle. So again, I'm saying even if you steel man, like the Christian hardcore, what you are doing is living a satanic life, then living that way and projecting that is actually going to perpetuate that exact thing rather than solving it or healing it or anything, which again is what Father Judd basically lays out at the very beginning of the movie.
I thought it handled the issues about lack of faith interestingly in the character of Grace. I mean, it's funny that her name is Grace in the first place. Basically, this church has been constructed around the hatred of grace. And we have characters in there, in that church, who are unable to give grace to others and unable to give grace to themselves. And so that part of it I thought was great. And then when Martha was in the midst of her confession, I think that it was Father Judd who said it, but it was Blanc who says it. He says she didn't desecrate the church. She was looking for the jewel. She was in this place of darkness and desperation. And I think that that's probably where a lot of people, a lot of Americans who lack faith and were like me, who their culture kind of led them into that. And speaking only for myself, you know, I never got anything out of my church experience growing up. It was boring. It was not transcendent. It was not inspiring. I didn't really understand it. It was just the same few Bible stories over and over and over again without context, except that's what came up on the calendar to be discussed in sermons that week. The sermons never connected. There was no connection from the minister to the church. And so I was just never into it. And by the time I was a teenager, you know, my parents gave us the choice once we were teenagers, do you still want to attend church on Sunday? And if you don't, we understand. And so I was like, well, no, I want to do whatever I want to do and then watch football in the afternoons. And I went to college and I studied philosophy. And I was like, oh, yeah, no one can prove that God exists. And there are all these really smart atheist arguments. I agree with all those. Those make total sense in like my worldly mindset. And so I just went on like that. And it wasn't like when I was an atheist and I would speak about atheism and speak out against God and the rest of it, it wasn't that I was desecrating the church so much. I was like, where is the thing? Like, why can't I have the thing? Everybody says there's things out there. I've looked for it. Clearly ain't there, right? So you just eventually get angry and you're like, no, stop. You are all kidding yourselves. I have checked. It's not there. all of you are kidding or lying, but whatever it is, I can see that the institution that you support is doing a bunch of bad things and it's doing them in your name, and you can't substantiate your belief for that thing in the first place. So it's clear that the whole thing is corrupt. The whole thing is bad. And then you just want nothing to do with it. So I was actually taken by that line. I was like, actually, I think this is saying something bigger than it appears on the surface. And I'm not suggesting that Ryan Johnson isn't aware of that. I'm suggesting that he included it in a very subtle way, which I think was effective.
Yeah, there's a back-to-back. I don't know if they're not back-to-back scenes, but there's two quotes from two different characters in two different contexts that I think sum that up. But one of them is exactly what you're saying. There's the Sai says, "Can you imagine what we could do in Christ's name?" when he's explaining like the dastardly plot to weaponize the cult of personality that he literally names it such, of Wicks, and the belief of his followers and his charisma and all this kind of stuff, the cult of personality. Can you imagine what we can do in Christ's name? And Father Judd's sitting there going, yes, I can imagine what you can do in Christ's name, and it's not good. There's another scene though by she's played by Kaylee Spaney, Simone, the girl who has sort of the nerve issues and the physical issues. She is sitting down with Father Judd early in the movie and says, she's explaining how she had this, undiagnosed issue, and the medical system couldn't figure it out, but they kept treating her with all these different things, and she paid them, tens of thousands of dollars and everything. That hit close to home for me because I've dealt with a lot of weird issues. Nerve injuries, Lyme disease that may or may not have been a deep state frickin' engineered pathogen. Who knows? Who knows what it is? That's the whole thing, though. And mentally, it's a brutal thing to go through because you are in physical pain every day, and you are looking for help, and you're going to the experts who are supposed to be able to help you. And what the experts do is they send you to other experts and they do tests on you. And I mean, I've seen hundreds of doctors, hundreds. I spent about 6 years of my life going to doctors every week in my 20s because of how much pain I was in at that time. And I had insurance, all this kind of stuff. But suffice to say, that particular vignette of her is a very real thing that people go through. Mm-hmm. And yeah, if you come out of that, not only not feeling better, but if you come out of that feeling worse, you get to a very dark place. And she says, the reason I bring her up is she says in that scene, to take someone's faith and exploit it for money, it feels medieval. I feel hopeful now. What I found so interesting about what she's saying is in the context of that scene, you know that Father Judd is sitting there going, you have fallen into a cult of personality that is itself weaponizing your newfound faith against you, which is Father Wicks. But she's also right, and this would be what you're talking about, I think, part of what you're talking about of rejecting the church when you're young, which I did as well. We had very similar reactions to it, where I'm like, I'm not getting anything out of it. I've been to it. Irish, I've talked about that before. I get it. I'm guilty. I'm bad. Like, why am I going here? What's this guy talking about? That was my experience with it. And you reject that. And sometimes what some people do, and a lot of liberals do, is they run to the system. They run to either atheism or the science, right? And what they're doing is they're building a new church, or they're going into a new church and they're saying, this is the church of logos and of reason and of the science and of the experts. The church is the science and the saints are the doctors. The men in, I wrote a thing, the men in white coats. And that's sort of, it's the priestly class. You can be talking about doctors. You can be talking about professors in academia. You can be talking about somebody reading chyrons, sitting in a suit and tie at a news desk. They are a priest of information. They, as Chris Cuomo famously said during COVID, We give that to you. You are not to go look for the sacred tablets of what was in, the CDC documents. We bring that to you. We tell it to you. And I think what Simone is saying in this movie is basically what she doesn't know this, but what Judd picks up is you're part of a church. You were already part of a church before you found this church. You were part of a church of the science and the medical industry and the system. And I think that's what a lot of so-called leftists fall into, just like a lot of so-called right-wingers or conservatives or Christians fall into churches, and they're following the church rather than the teachings, or rather than Jesus, or rather than God.
Indeed. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit because we're kind of starting to approach that time. As you mentioned earlier, one of the biggest and most interesting and important aspects of this movie was the role that stories and storytelling play in all of this. And I think that obviously the key scene is when Father Judd is talking to Benoit Blanc in the church, and the sun shines down on Blanc's face, and he's talking about the church and the symbolism and of the building and the rest of it. And Father Judd says, yeah, I understand this. Obviously, this church was built in the 1900s. It's like neo-Gothic. This is like the Disneyland of churches, but here we are in it, and it does look like this, and it does inspire these feelings. And ultimately, you're right that it's all a story. But what matters is whether or not the story is leading us towards something deeper and something true, or whether it's convincing us of a lie. And I think that, that's something that we've talked about a number of times over the years. Some of that in just rationalizing and justifying our approach to and trying to give the benefit of the doubt to, which I think is being charitable in many cases. It's not like we're ignoring the possibility that these stories are not being told for good, and that they actually are being told to lead people down a dark path. But there's a chance, we have to leave room for the fact that people are trying to tell these stories false though they may be, out of time though they may be, orchestrated though they may be, to bring people to a higher understanding of truth. And that's something that Donald Trump himself might be the ringleader of. I don't think that there's nothing to that. Can you tell a series of stories that are unverifiably real that lead people toward the truth? Well, yes, you can. And if you are able to, for instance, like the Bible, for instance, is the word of God, but it is not like word with a capital letter. It is a book inspired by God, written down by man through the perspective of different men. Okay. And something can be divinely inspired, channeled through a human, and be different than something divinely inspired and channeled through another human. And people get very upset about the inconsistencies, or their perceived inconsistencies, in the Bible. And that's totally understandable if you're only looking at it in this legalistic manner, where you're saying these words conflict with these words, therefore the whole thing has been falsified, which is crazy. But it's illustrative of divine order. And so that's word with the capital W, which is a direct translation of logos, but logos is divine order embodied in Jesus Christ. Logos is divine order. It has been there from the beginning. Jesus embodies that in the world. And so the little w word is illustrative of big W word. Okay. And so to that extent, it is entirely illuminating something true, which means that it is true at its foundation, and the whole thing together is true. Therefore, the parts are true. And it doesn't need to be literally true in the way that someone might demand if they're going about it in that secular legalistic way. It's true because of what it is and what it illuminates. And so is the story that we are being told through these cultural channels ultimately that sort of truth? Well, I guess that depends on how you perceive it and who the perceiver is, and whether that perceiver is kind of in touch with and open to those higher truths, or whether they're just going to take that secular worldly, legalistic approach to it.
Yeah, I mean that all well said. That's my favorite exchange in the whole movie. I think it's well done, and it's you and I. I mean, if there's like a core theme to Story Hour over the last 4 years, it's basically that. It's we've talked exhaustively about the power of storytelling, and I've dropped the anecdote several times on this show of a conversation with my father-in-law where he asked me why I write fiction instead of, this was years ago, why I write fiction instead of nonfiction if I'm so interested in the goings on in the world. And I had said, I think you can communicate more truth through fiction than you can through nonfiction for a couple of reasons. One of them was that I think a lot of people lie with nonfiction. A lot of this audience is here because you, one way or another, by hook or by crook, figured out or discerned for yourself that the people who purport to be telling you the news, which is nonfiction, are lying to you. So nonfiction as a genre, I would say half of it is lies, knowing lies. The other half of it is accidental lies, which is not to say that none of it is true. It's just to say that if you're reading an earnest history of George Washington, it's completely full of shit. And the reason I say that is there is no way that the guy writing that book knows any of that stuff.
Yeah.
All of the stuff he is writing about is itself being sourced secondhand by something else, which is being sourced by something else, which is being sourced by something else. And then even if you want to go all the way to primary source documents, they don't exist, which is to say they are unverifiable to us as being primary source documents. If I could know that I am reading a letter that George Washington wrote, yes, it would provide me some measure of insight into some small fraction of what that man believed when he wrote that letter. But there is no way that you can convince me that that is what I am reading, because I have no way of verifying the chain of custody of that piece of paper or those words from the time in which George Washington lived and the action of him. Like, this is so simple and so controversial when we say stuff like this. But once you recognize that, and then you go take a gander over at what's going on in fiction, the word I've always used to describe fiction is honesty, which is a paradox, and it's one that makes sense. Fiction is honest about what it is doing, and what it is doing is telling you a story. That is what fiction is doing. Nonfiction is being dishonest about the fact that it is telling you a story. That is what nonfiction is. The difference is people writing nonfiction either are knowingly lying to you or they believe they are telling you something true, which is arguably even more dangerous than somebody who is writing nonfiction and knows that they are, somebody who's writing fiction and knows that they're writing fiction. And it's kind of funny because my example of this is, while I rejected Christianity and church and all that as a kid, I was extremely inspired by and taken with Tolkien. And of course, now as an adult who's coming into more of an earnest understanding or engagement with Christian belief and the Bible and all that, I think of Tolkien all the time whenever I'm engaged with that, because I'm like, oh, there's those first principles, there's those moral principles, there's these character archetypes. Like, it's all biblical archetypes just being repeated through fiction. And then I think, oh, well, is this just because this is a famous, why do I like Tolkien? Because it's a famous story? No, the right question to ask with enduring fiction like Tolkien is, why is it enduring? Why is this work of fiction so enduring within Western culture? And I would argue it's because, to everything you just said, it is true. It communicates something true. It communicates what good men are and what bad men are, and how good men can fall and how bad men can be redeemed, and how power is not the end all be all. In fact, it's usually the opposite, the pursuit of worldly power. And all of those things are biblical Christian logos. but they were communicated to me in an effective way as a 10-year-old through The Lord of the Rings. And, but what's funny is I remember Christians crapping all over it when I was young liberal and being like, that's a bunch of bullshit. You're reading a bunch of like fairy tale stories. It's like, okay, well, I don't know. I mean, if you lived your life in accordance with sort of Aragorn's values, you're probably living a Christian life, even if you came to it through a story that you liked or a story that inspired you. And again, I think that's something that Judd communicates very effectively. And I also think it's kind of a good sort of good-natured takedown of what Benoit Blanc is saying in that scene. The atheist and the cynic and the logical maximalist. He says touche because there's really nothing he can say to Judd's argument in that moment.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just correct. And that's one of the things that that people don't like admitting, because again, the arguments against faith are almost always made on the material realm and the inability to prove God's existence on material terms, inconsistencies in the Bible, the actions of the institutional church, and you can go on and on and on. And these are all kind of like second order operations that aren't actually the thing itself. And so, you can take a good thing and make it bad in any number of ways, just like you can take bad things and turn them for the good. But to take a good thing and figure out ways to make it bad does not actually destroy the good thing in itself. It's just a recognition of the thing that you're doing with that. That is itself the deviation. That's what's corrupting. I have a bunch of things that I wanted to get to, and I don't know if maybe we should go quickly through them. I'm sure you got a bunch too. Where should I start here? Maybe this is kind of in line. I love the line from Benoit Blanc after he kind of screams in the church to get everybody's attention and to be, the fire and brimstone guy, because that's what these people pay attention to. And they all one by one sat down, even the lady cop who has no interest in God or religion, she immediately sat down. And you have to wonder what that suggests about her, that someone in and of the world can exploit her emotions that way and the tone of voice and the rest of it. And she just immediately falls into line. But after that, he says that he wants to understand the meaning of the myth. He wants to feel it in his soul. And I get that. And it's too bad that he is unable to access that part, although maybe he does, and he's just not willing to let go of this character that he's built up for so long, all based on these worldly values. And you hear it for a second when he talks about his road to Damascus experience. At the very end of it, he's like, shit, which is the reaction that you have. Yeah. You're like, oh man, wow, I really got all that stuff wrong. That means a whole lot of things about how I'm going to have to approach the rest of my life. And I had no idea that this was at the end of the path of my realization. It's the realization that everything before this that I did was messed up. And now I have to figure out how to reconcile that and still live in the world as it is.
There's a lot going on in that scene, and especially on rewatches of when he's going to unfurl the grand answer to the mystery. And Blanc knows the answer in that moment when he's in the church. He knows that it was Martha who did it. He knows how she did it. He knows why she did it, or at least he knows the mechanistic reasons why she did it, the motive. And earlier in the movie, we have Blanc make one or two or three allusions to the fact that he is aware of his own character. Like, he is aware that the end of the Benoit Blanc stories end with a grand unraveling in which he takes the stage and he unfurls the mystery for all to see, and they all marvel upon him. And he kind of says it in a self-deprecating manner, But especially on rewatches, you mentioned the road to Damascus, and I think what that scene doubles as in the end in the church is an ego death, temporary or permanent, of Benoit Blanc, in that there is no logical or ego-serving reason for him to do what he does, which is essentially to extend grace to Martha, who he recognizes is going to die. And he gives her the opportunity to unburden herself, essentially, to Father Judd. There is no worldly reason for him to do that. There is nothing that he gets served by doing that. In fact, as you can see through the rest of the movie leading up to that, and the other the other two movies in the trilogy, which is why it actually does work, at least on a character motivation level. The first two movies, if you're a viewer, what I think Johnson does a good job of there, if you're a viewer of the Knives Out trilogy, you've seen Benoit Blanc do this twice already, where he does take the stage and has a grand unfurling, and he grants catharsis and justice to everybody in the movie and to everybody watching the movie and engaged with the story. And he takes that from everybody in the movie in that scene with Martha, and he takes it from the audience, who is used to that, right? You as the audience member are used to this story template unraveling in that way. And he takes it from the audience too. And instead, he gives grace this attempt. And I think from a plotting perspective and from a template archetypal perspective, it's unsatisfying on paper. But it's not unsatisfying because part of this is good acting. But Glenn Close and Josh O'Connor, the way they play that scene at the end and the way it's edited and presented by Johnson, I think is so human and graceful and cathartic that you almost feel a little bit of shame in having wanted him to nail her in the middle of the church, right? Because that's what you think he's going to do. So it's a great, especially on rewatches, I really was like, it is such a great way for it all to come together and to communicate those themes, and demonstrates that whether Blanc is leaving the church having discovered faith or not, that's not what I take out of it. But I do think the road to Damascus for him is there's been some form of ego death in him doing that and extending that grace to another person. And it demonstrates, I think in no uncertain terms, that whatever Blanc takes out of this mystery, Father Judd has changed him in some way, I think for the better, whether or not he subscribes to the same belief system after it.
The other interesting thing in that scene when he was breaking it down in front of the small congregation of the radicalized was when the Simone character says, she says, I didn't write down the direct quote, I don't think, but she said, give us the answer. Like, isn't that what all this is for?
Right.
And that's something that a lot of people deal with as Christians. They want to know in worldly ways, this is the correct thing. It's a question of faith. It's a comfort with the mystery or a discomfort, depending on the person. But it's also true of people in the phase that we're witnessing in our culture right now. Everybody wants to get to the end. Everybody wants the proof from authoritative sources so that they can go around and say things like elections are fake or the vaccine is a bad idea or anything else. They want the authorities to admit what they've done wrong or a different authority to come in, prove that these people have done something wrong, and then do something to hold them accountable. They want the answers. Isn't that what all this is for? The answer ultimately is no, that's not what all this is for. You can have the answers on your own, or you can decide that finding the answers are not important, but you are called to do the same things regardless of whether the answers are supplied for you or not. And we have to just continue moving forward, even if it is only mystery ahead.
Well, and to extend that point, and this is, I'm including myself in this as somebody who used to say this, I was following Q from a week after it was posting, and got into the hunt for justice and all that kind of stuff. I still believe in justice. I still believe justice is important. I believe truth is important. I wouldn't be doing any of this stuff or talking about the stuff I do if I didn't believe that. But what I am reconciling in the last couple of years in particular is one thing I used to say, and one thing many people in sort of the broader truth movement talk about. One of the refrains they use is, we need justice. We need justice for these things. And they're using the word need. We need it. And to your point about answers, that's one side of it. The other side of it is this idea of we need justice. I would like to see justice delivered upon people if they deserve it, if we're right about these things, which is always an open question of what exactly are we right about, who exactly are we right about, and who are we wrong about. There's plenty of those that we do not know, and a lot of people are not willing to admit that they do not know the answers, even if they strongly suspect them. But it's a bigger deal, I think, to start to let go of this idea that you need justice. I don't think that's a defeatist mindset. To go back to the scene I really like in the movie that I said ultimately Father Judd is proven right, I think, is when Wicks is saying, we got to this place because men like you, Father Judd, didn't stand up and do something. You didn't deliver justice onto the world. And now we need people like me to swing the axe. And ultimately, I think Father Judd is proven right, that it's like, what are you getting out of this? Who are you delivering justice unto? Who are you to deliver that justice and to demand that justice? And I think that's something we all need to ruminate on and reconcile in the truth community. What if Donald Trump does not deliver that justice for you and to you? What does that mean? Does that mean that you hate everything that he stood for or symbolized to you? He's an important epochal figure for people. Doesn't mean he's a messiah or anything, but definitely a zeitgeist-changing figure. And a cipher, as you and I talk about a lot. So is everybody going to turn on that cipher and that figure and that symbol because he doesn't do the thing that they demand that he does? And as part of the point of some of this, if it is a good plan, is the plan bigger than people have given it credit for? Do some of the good people behind whatever plans may or may not be going on, understand on some level that some performative justice campaign is not what all this has been leading toward? I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's something that people should make friends with and think about.
Indeed. That's mostly it for me. I thought it was really interesting that Blanc went through with Father Judd. They both went through Dr. Nat or something. Yeah. His apartment. It was, the door was open and, pictures were broken and whatever. It's a total mess. But we have this great renowned detective just willing to break all the rules about the preservation of evidence in what may well be a murder scene or a scene related to murder that he already suspects is a murder scene. He just doesn't care at all because he prioritizes his search for truth over the rules that could bring justice. And I thought that was interesting that it's an example of when truth and justice are actually in some kind of conflict or disharmony, and where even Benoit Blanc, who claims to answer to no higher authority and not be interested in those sorts of things, he's still making a qualitative judgment here that it is nonetheless the right thing to do to violate this scene, even if it means that justice won't be served.
Yeah. Yeah, we even see that sometimes in whether it's fiction or reality about the solving of crimes. One of the sort of Freudian slips, I think, that investigators often make is whether they're police or whatever, they say, do we have enough? Do we have enough to convict? Do we have enough to sentence? And it's like, hold on. Shouldn't the question be, are we right about this? Yeah. Right? Those are two very different questions to ask. Do we have enough? Do we have a compelling enough story to enact vengeance onto this person that we have deemed deserves it. Not are we right about what this person did? And that's a bigger question. And the last thing for me would be this has been relevant in many respects over the last couple of years in particular, and over the last week, post by John about this whole hullabaloo going on with General Flynn. I don't even know what it's all about, to be honest. But there's many examples of this. I think this movie kind of illustrates it in several different ways. But purity tests, loyalty tests, however you want to frame it, struggle sessions, as you often say, they tend to be reverse indicators. Not every time, but usually when a group of people, whether that group of people is commie leftists or conink, right-tards, or truthers who are trusting the plan, when a group of people get together and subject somebody to a purity test based not on logic or reason or deduction or first principles, but just based on groupthink and social domination, that's usually a reverse indicator of who those people are and what those people are about. And we've seen that everywhere in the last couple of years, especially in the so-called truth community.
Yeah, and what it is they're serving, which should then make one question, are they serving someone or something? Like, is this for another purpose? And then you find out that whole thing becomes a circle, and it gets very strange after that. Last thing for me, I thought it was great, the way that they handled the scene where he's on the phone, where Father Judd's on the phone with Louise, the woman who they operate the machine company that sent the heavy machinery over to have the door of the crypt removed. She kind of breaks down at a point. Father Judd is trying to hurry her along, and she's being so nice and so polite, even though he's kind of being rude and dismissive. And then she finally asks him to pray for her, and he performs this really well, but you can kind of see his worry and his hurry and his anxiety just remove itself from him, because he remembers, oh yeah, this is my actual calling. This is my actual priority. The hurry of this situation is something coming from the outside. This has nothing to do with the thing that I'm supposed to be doing. I have to immediately reassess my priorities, put these in line, and then move forward. And he does that. And I think that kind of encapsulates the point of the theme of the film in general.
Yeah, and I'd add on to that I think, there's a lot of godly imagery, like very overt godly imagery throughout this movie, of course. There's churches, there's even that scene we were talking about where Blanc and Judd are going back and forth about storytelling and faith. You've got the sun setting or dipping behind the clouds and then peeking out from the clouds right through the window and, climaxing in that scene. You have a lot of that stuff. The movie ends with overt Christ imagery, but that scene you just brought up, and I'm glad you brought it up, I think that's the most godly scene in the movie. And that is, it's dark, it's rainy, it's sort of depressing. It's, as you said, it's anxious. It's an anxious scene with a lot of tension. And it's like, well, that is the lesson for Father Judd in that moment. And I think it's also, again, I think what Johnson does a good job of in this movie is, as an audience member, you feel that in that moment. You're like, come on, like, we got to figure the shit out. Come on, you got to get this thing. Like, we're watching the movie. It's got to get to the next thing that these guys have to figure out so that I, watching the movie, can also figure the thing out. And that's what murder mysteries do. That's what the whole mystery box storytelling template does with an audience. And I think that scene is so well played and written because it gets you to stop and be like, hey, it's not only that Father Judd was kind of being an asshole, you were being kind of an asshole watching that scene because you thought this is just some extra on the phone. Can we skip past this scene and get to like a real scene? And, then it ends up being really earnest. And, I even like how Daniel Craig plays it in that scene because he's like annoyed, but respectful, but he's tapping his thumb and he's tapping his pencil. And then when he opens the door and sees Judd, Father Judd kind of finishing his prayer, you can see that's even the tension from his face kind of drops. And he's like, okay, let's just move on from this. Obviously, that was important to him.
Yeah. Okay. I guess unless you have anything else, we can leave it there.
That's it.
Okay. So I know that we got some people dropped some subscriptions in the chat. Snowcat Operator was one, and you might
and Petty 429 as well. So thank you for that. Otherwise, we're caught up.
Okay, cool. And so the film for next week, I'm going to go back to the 90s. I remember somebody recommending this, but I don't remember who recommended it. I have never seen it. It looks like fun. The description is 2 former U.S. presidents, hated rivals, join forces to expose the current corrupt president at the risk of their lives. So it's My Fellow Americans, starring Jack Lemmon, James Garner, Dan Aykroyd, and then like just a whole cast: John Hurd, Wilford Brimley, Lauren Bacall, Everett McGill of Twin Peaks fame, Bradley Whitford, and again, James Rebhorn in like every other movie we've done for the last 2 months. So My Fellow Americans for next week. Yeah, I had I was not familiar with it, so I look forward to checking it out. Seems kind of there's got to be relevant material in here. I think it'll be fun. So next week, My Fellow Americans. And with that, thank you everybody for watching. Thank you to tonight's sponsor, Earth Echo. Try cacaobliss.com/Badlands. Please hit the thumb on the way out if you are watching on Rumble or YouTube. Actually, you know what? I didn't check to see if there were any YouTube rants or whatever it's called over there, super chats.
I always forget.
Hold on. Now I'm looking, and I don't know if it's going to give me the chat that we saw prior to this. But hello, YouTube. Sorry if we ignored you. Looks like we're good over there. Okay. So we're good over there. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Hit the thumb on your way out, and we will see you next week for My Fellow Americans. Good night.